I never thought I'd see the day my own blood would laugh while I lay on the cold floor, bruised, shaking, clutching my ribs after being struck. But there I was, one hand over my side, the other gripping the kitchen counter to keep from collapsing. My daughter-in-law, Cassandra, still holding the broom, eyes sharp with rage, stood over me like I was some animal that had crossed into her territory. "Don't you dare raise your voice in my house again," she snapped. Before I could say a word, my son, David, walked in, stared at me on the floor and chuckled. "Don't call 911, Mum. You're being dramatic." He shook his head like I was the problem, like I was the one who had shattered the peace in their perfect home. Before I dive in, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps more people hear stories like this. It started just a month earlier, when David asked me to move in with them. My arthritis was getting worse, and after my husband passed away, the house felt too big and empty. I hesitated, not wanting to be a burden. But David insisted. "You're not a burden, Mum. We'll be happy to have you here." That was before I realised how much Cassandra hated the idea. The moment I stepped inside their house with my suitcase, Cassandra's smile was painted on, thin and cold. "Let me show you the guest room," she said, already walking away. David was too busy taking a work call to notice the stiff tone. At first, I tried everything to make peace. I cooked dinner, cleaned the bathroom, even folded their laundry when I could. Cassandra would nod politely but never thank me. She always had this way of twisting my kindness into something intrusive. "Oh, you rearranged the spice rack. I liked it how it was," she said one day. I smiled and apologised, but her words were needles. Then there were the whispers. I'd walk into the room and hear silence fall like a dropped plate. Sometimes I'd hear her speaking low into the phone. "She's always here, breathing down my neck, like a ghost that won't leave." David never seemed to hear any of it, or maybe he didn't want to. One evening I made stew for dinner, a recipe David used to love when he was little. Cassandra took one bite, then pushed the bowl away. "Too salty," she muttered. "I'll order something." David laughed awkwardly and said, "You know she's picky, Mum." I nodded and took the untouched bowl back to the kitchen. That night I cried in silence. A week later, Cassandra walked in with shopping bags, expensive shoes, designer bags, perfumes. She left them on the table with a smirk. I couldn't help but ask, "David gave you money for all that?" Her head snapped up. "What I buy is none of your business, old woman." David came in a moment later. "Everything okay here?" he asked. Cassandra was quick. "Your mum's upset I bought new shoes." She pouted. "I can return them if she's uncomfortable." David sighed and turned to me. "Mum, please, try to get along with her." My heart broke a little more that day. Things got worse when I caught her yelling at the housekeeper, blaming her for a missing earring. I knew it was Cassandra's carelessness. I spoke up. "Maybe it fell behind the dresser." Cassandra turned to me, eyes blazing. "Don't interfere, I don't need your help." The housekeeper looked at me with grateful eyes, but that only made Cassandra hate me more. I tried to talk to David later. "She's treating people badly, even me." But he cut me off. "Cassandra's under stress. She's been trying to make this work." I stared at him, wondering where the boy I raised had gone. Then came the day of the broom. It started with something as simple as orange juice. I had taken the last glass from the fridge without realising she wanted it. She came into the kitchen and saw me drinking it. Her eyes narrowed. "You really have no boundaries, do you?" "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't know you wanted it." She snatched the glass from my hand, spilling juice down my dress. "You're not sorry. You just want to make my life harder." I stood up, reaching for a towel to wipe myself. That's when she grabbed the broom by the door and swung it. The first hit landed on my shoulder. I cried out. The second one hit my side. I gasped and stumbled, falling to the floor. Pain surged through me like fire. That's when David walked in. He looked at me lying there and just laughed. "Don't call 911, he said. "It's not that serious." I stared at him in disbelief. The boy I raised, who used to hold my hand when he was scared of the dark, was now watching his wife hurt me and laughing. I stayed silent, but something shifted inside me. That night I went back to my room and stared at the ceiling until dawn. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I planned. The next morning, I packed a small bag, quietly called a car and left. No goodbyes, no explanations, just silence. David didn't even call to ask where I'd gone. Not once. But I didn't vanish. I went straight to the city. I had money, more than they knew. For years, I'd quietly invested what little I had into publishing. Books, education, reading programs. I always believed stories could heal the world. That morning, I walked into a sleek new building downtown, the headquarters of the Marjorie Green Foundation. My name, my legacy. It had been under construction for a year. Now it was finished. I told the staff we'd have our grand opening next week. I asked them to make it public. Invite everyone, especially the media. 7 days later, on a bright Tuesday morning, David walked into a local bookstore with Cassandra holding her hand. Cameras flashed. A new section had just opened, sponsored by the foundation. "We're so proud to host the launch of this literacy program," the manager said. David laughed. "Looks like someone really believes in this." Then he turned and saw the plaque. His face drained of colour. The Marjorie Green Foundation for Literacy, funded by a $2.3 million private donation. He stared, and I stood right behind the glass, watching. He turned slowly and saw me, standing tall. No broom, no bruises. Just a woman who had rebuilt herself in silence. David stood frozen, like someone had yanked the ground out from under him. His hand slowly dropped from Cassandra's shoulder. She didn't understand why the cameras had shifted toward me, why the whispers started. Her smile remained fake and plastered until her eyes followed David's gaze, and then she saw it. My name, carved boldly into the marble behind the register. The Marjorie Green Foundation for Literacy. She blinked, stunned, then leaned toward him, whispering something. David didn't answer. I stepped into the room, heels echoing softly against the polished floor. "It's a beautiful morning, isn't it?" I said, cool and calm. The manager of the bookstore turned to the crowd. "And we're honoured today to welcome Marjorie Green herself, whose generous contributions made all this possible." Cassandra's mouth fell open. David's face was pale. I nodded to the crowd, gave a small wave, and walked to the front. "Thank you. I believe every child deserves the chance to open a book and find a better world inside. And sometimes, you build that better world, when the one behind you tries to bury you." The applause was soft, but real. David took a step forward, trying to recover. "Mum, why didn't you tell us about all this?" I looked at him, keeping my face neutral. "I thought you weren't interested. You said I was being dramatic, remember?" Before he could answer, Cassandra scoffed. "So what? You paid for this? This is just some charity play?" Her voice was too loud for the room. A few people looked away, uncomfortable. I smiled politely. "Well, Cassandra, you know how dramatic I can be. Before I continue with what happened next, let me take you back, because this moment didn't come out of nowhere. It was built slowly, brick by brick, through humiliation, silence, and one final blow from a broom that turned everything around. It began long before I stepped into their house. David was my only son. I raised him alone after his father died in an accident when David was just 10. I worked 2 jobs, nights at the diner, weekends at the library. I made sure he had books, a hot meal, and shoes that weren't falling apart. I poured everything into him. When he graduated with honours and got a tech job in the city, I was proud beyond words. He called me less after that, said he was busy. I understood. Life gets loud. But then he brought Cassandra home. She was beautiful, polished, confident, and very good at pretending. At first I welcomed her. I made her tea, gave her my mother's bracelet. I thought she was family. But slowly, her mask slipped. The way she spoke to me changed. She'd correct me in front of guests, laugh when I confused a phone app, whisper to David when I left the room. Still, I stayed silent. I told myself, maybe I'm imagining it. After David asked me to move in, I thought maybe she'd soften. Maybe having me around would help her see who I really was. Instead, it got worse. She made sure I knew my place. She left passive-aggressive notes on the fridge. Please don't rearrange the silverware. Remember, the guest bathroom is for guests only. The thermostat is set for a reason. And David. He stayed quiet, always picking his career over conflict, always telling me, just let it go, Mum. But I didn't let it go. I wrote it down, every insult, every bruise, every word. I kept a journal, and in it, I also wrote my dreams, quiet ones I never told anyone. I'd always loved books, loved the smell of libraries, the peace of turning a page. I wanted to start something that mattered, a foundation that could help kids find escape through stories, just like I once did. When I invested the little money I had into a local book project, I told no one. I didn't want Cassandra mocking me, or David brushing it off. Over the years, those investments grew. Small at first, $100 here, $200 there. Then I met a young woman named Amara at a community literacy event. She introduced me to a publisher who loved my vision. Together we built something new, quietly, in my name. And when Cassandra hit me that day, something snapped. I realized I'd spent too long begging for space in a house where I was unwelcome. I didn't need their pity. I had purpose. I had my own house, in the form of every child who'd one day walk through the doors of a library built with my hands. That night, while icing my bruises, I logged into my accounts and signed over $2.3 million into the foundation. And I told the team, announce the grand opening, loud and clear, make sure the whole city knew. I wanted them to see what a burden could do in silence. Back at the bookstore, the media was already snapping pictures. A reporter approached me. Mrs. Green, how does it feel to see your name above such an important initiative? I smiled gently. It feels like peace. David stood behind me, still stunned. Cassandra hissed under her breath. We didn't know she had that kind of money. I turned. You didn't ask. Then calmly I walked out. Cameras followed. And David didn't call that night, or the next. But it wouldn't be long before the story unravelled further. Because what came next shook their marriage, their pride and their wallet. They thought I was gone for good. They had no idea how deeply I'd buried the roots. 3 days after the bookstore unveiling, my phone rang. It was a number I hadn't saved, but I recognised the area code. It was David's city. I let it ring twice more before answering, keeping my voice calm. Hello? A pause. Then his voice, low, unsure. Mum, Can we talk? I leaned back in my chair, glancing out the window of my apartment. Sunlight poured in. My bruises were healing, but the scar underneath, the one they couldn't see, still throbbed with every memory. I'm listening, I said. I didn't know you were doing all this. The foundation, the money. Why didn't you ever say anything? I gave a small laugh. Why would I? Last time I said something, your wife hit me with a broom and you told me not to call for help. He went quiet. I was angry, he finally said. I thought you were overreacting. No, I replied softly but firmly. You thought I was weak. That silence on the other end lasted too long. I never wanted things to get this bad, he said. Cassandra's been going through a lot. She's been cruel, David, I said, and you've been complicit. He sighed, but there was no apology, no real remorse, just excuses. I could hear it in the tremble of his breath, the tight grip he probably had on his phone. But I was done accepting silence as love. I didn't call to argue, he added. I wanted to invite you over, for dinner. Just us. I want to make things right. I didn't answer right away. My heart told me no. But something in me, maybe the mother who still remembered the little boy who cried after scraping his knee, said yes. Fine, I said. I'll come. 1 hour, that's all. The next evening, I stepped into the house I once called home. Cassandra wasn't there. David had set the table for 2. The air was thick with quiet tension. We sat. He served a simple chicken dish, something I used to make. I remember you used to put time in this, I said, tasting the blandness. He looked up, almost embarrassed. I'm not as good at it. We ate in silence for a moment. Then he said, Do you remember when I was 9 and I asked you why we never had steak? I smiled. I told you it was because we had something better. Books. And I said, Books can't be eaten. You told me, no, but they feed your future. We both chuckled. Then he added, I think. I forgot that. I watched him carefully. You didn't forget. You traded it. For comfort. For a woman who couldn't see value in anything that didn't come in a gold box. She's not all bad, he muttered. No? I leaned forward. Then tell me, how many times has she hit you? His face paled. I've seen her temper. You think she only took it out on me? He opened his mouth but didn't speak. I stood. I'm leaving. But thank you. For dinner. He followed me to the door, unsure. Mom, will you ever forgive me? I paused. You didn't just fail to protect me. You laughed. That's something I have to heal from on my own timeline. Then I walked away again. This time without tears. That night I sat with my journal. Entry. Day 132 since I left. David invited me to dinner. I went. I saw a flicker of the boy I raised. But flickers aren't flames. And forgiveness isn't a door I walk through easily anymore. The next day, Cassandra's voice showed up in my life again, but this time, not through a broomstick, through headlines. Viral video shows woman screaming at bookstore event, foundation staff push her out. I blinked in disbelief, then clicked play. There she was, Cassandra, red-faced, furious, storming into another bookstore that had just partnered with my foundation. She screamed something about old women stealing attention and knocked over a display. She had no idea there were cameras, but the media did, and the clip spread like fire. I got a call from a lawyer that afternoon. Mrs. Green, he said, you may want to prepare. We've been served a cease and desist. She claims emotional damage. I laughed so hard I had to sit down. She hit me with a broom. I left quietly. She storms into my foundation's event, and I caused emotional damage. She's unhinged, the lawyer said, but we'll handle it. Over the next week, Cassandra tried everything. Online rants, deleted posts, fake apologies. She even posted a photo of the broom with the caption, "This is what she calls abuse?" But people weren't buying it. The internet had already crowned me the unlikely hero. Bookstore grandma, they called me. The quiet avenger. Even news shows picked it up. They didn't just talk about the fight. They focused on the foundation, on the reading programs, the scholarships, the kids who now had books because one woman refused to stay broken. Cassandra's meltdown only fueled the flame. And David? He called again. This time to say, she's threatening divorce. I didn't say anything at first. Then I asked, and what do you want, David? I want peace. You had it, I said. But you chose her silence over my dignity. And now you're living with both the noise and the shame. Click. I hung up. Weeks passed. The foundation expanded. A new branch opened across town and I was invited to cut the ribbon. I wore a red coat, the same one I'd worn the day I was hit. Not as a reminder of pain, but as armor. At the ceremony, a girl, maybe 11 years old, hugged me and said, "Thank you. I never had my own book before." I nearly cried. Later that week, I received an envelope, no return address. Inside was a check, made out to the foundation, for $250,000. The memo line said, For the Broom. C. I stared at it for a long time. Cassandra. Guilt money? Silence money? Who knew? I didn't cash it, but I didn't tear it up either. Instead, I placed it in my journal. Next to the entry, she thought I'd stay quiet, but I built a whole world out of that silence. The day after the anonymous check arrived, I sat by the window holding a cup of peppermint tea. I had placed Cassandra's $250,000 offering, because that's what it was, an offering, between the pages of my journal like a pressed flower. Part apology, part manipulation, part desperation. I hadn't decided which yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Guilt from people like Cassandra never came wrapped in sincerity. It came packaged with motives. Later that afternoon, the Foundation's office buzzed with energy. A documentary crew from a local station wanted to feature the story of how the literacy initiative came to be. Not the controversy, they said, but the heart of it. The kind of story people watched late at night when they needed to believe the world could still be good. I agreed, on one condition. No makeup team, no airbrushing, I said. Show the lines, show the truth. The interviewer arrived 2 days later. A young woman with kind eyes and a voice that made you want to confess everything. We sat in the small reading lounge of our newest location. Soft lighting, rows of gently used books, kids in the background laughing and reading. She hit record. Can you tell us what made you start this foundation? I smiled slowly. I was hit with a broom in my own son's kitchen. She blinked. Sorry, I didn't expect... I leaned forward. That moment, when I was on the floor and my son told me not to call 911, that was the moment I realized my voice had been lost, so I did the only thing I could. I wrote my voice into the world instead, through books, through this. She sat in silence for a beat, then said, Thank you. After the interview aired, the calls flooded in. Libraries wanted partnerships, schools asked for funding. A small indie publisher even offered to print a memoir, if I ever wanted to write one. I laughed at the idea. Me? A memoir? But deep inside, the thought stayed. Meanwhile, David was unraveling. I know this not because he told me, but because people talk. His co-workers sent emails to the foundation thanking us for the work. One even ended the message with, P.S. Your son's been quieter these days. I think he's finally realizing what he lost. I ignored it, but then the knock came. Not a call, not a message, a knock. At 9:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, I opened the door to find David standing there, alone, no suit, no confidence, just a wrinkled hoodie and dark circles under his eyes. I know I should have called, he said. You shouldn't have come, I replied. He nodded, accepting that. I just wanted to say one thing. I saw the interview. You looked strong. And I remember being a kid, sitting at the table while you worked overnight shifts. I remember thinking, my mum can survive anything. But somewhere along the way, I stopped admiring that. I started resenting it. I said nothing. He swallowed. I didn't laugh because it was funny, Mum. I laughed because I was embarrassed, because I couldn't handle it. I didn't want to admit what was happening, that my wife was hurting you, that I was doing nothing. He looked down. She left, a week ago. Took the dog, took the car. I let her. I crossed my arms. So you're here because you're alone? No, he said quickly. I'm here because you were never just a mother. You were an architect, and I destroyed the house you built for me. I studied his face. This was no performance. There was no Cassandra nearby feeding him lines. This was David, raw, exposed. Still, I didn't move aside to let him in. Regret is not the same as redemption, I said. I know. You don't just walk in after months and get to wash your hands. I know. And your apology doesn't undo the bruises, or the silence, or the boy who laughed while his mother lay bleeding. His eyes were wet now. I know. Silence stretched between us. The wind rustled through the ivy on the porch railing. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said. But I'm also not ready to forget that you were once a boy who wrote me birthday poems on construction paper. He smiled faintly. You still have them? I nodded. I kept everything. Another pause. I brought something, he said, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a flash drive. It's a video, from the security cam that day. The kitchen. I had it. I just couldn't look at it before. I stared at it. He placed it on the table beside me. Whatever you choose to do with it, it's yours. So is the story now. He turned and walked away. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just stood there, staring at the flash drive, feeling the full weight of what it might contain. Later that night, I watched it. And for the first time, I saw it from another angle. Not just the broom. Not just Cassandra's rage. But the way David flinched. The way he tried to laugh but looked terrified. The way he walked away but kept looking back. Maybe he hadn't been the villain I thought. Maybe he'd been a coward, a weak man, but not evil. I didn't excuse him, but I understood him better. The next morning I went to the Foundation's main office. My assistant, Camille, was already preparing for the week's event, a storytelling day for foster kids. We need one more reader for the 11 mog slot, she said. I smiled. I'll take it. At 11 sharp, I sat in the beanbag circle and opened a book. The children gathered close. This story, I began, is about a woman who lost her voice, but found a way to speak louder than ever. And as I read, I saw one girl in the front row staring up at me, not just listening, but absorbing every word like it was oxygen. That's when I knew. Maybe the story wasn't about revenge after all. Maybe it was about reclaiming your name and letting it echo louder than your silence ever did. It was a Tuesday evening when I stood in front of the city council. I wore the same red coat, hair pulled back neatly, makeup minimal. The plaque behind me read, Annual Recognition for Public Contribution to City Youth. They were giving me an award, not because I asked, not because I made noise, but because the quiet work I poured into my foundation had rippled wider than I expected. I gave my speech simply, no drama, no grand gestures. I was silenced once, I said. But instead of shouting, I built spaces for children to read. I built programs that teach them to tell their stories before someone else tells it for them. And I hope, long after I'm gone, that the kids walking through these bookstores remember one thing, that even when no one listens, your voice still matters. You just have to choose where to plant it. They stood and clapped, and as I stepped down, I saw him again. David, standing in the back of the room, no longer hunched, no longer unsure, but not arrogant either, humble, watching. After the ceremony, he approached me slowly. I didn't come to talk, he said. I just wanted to say, you were brilliant. I nodded. Thank you. He shifted awkwardly. I moved, got a smaller place. I signed divorce papers last week. She wanted half of everything, even the apartment I bought before we married. And? I gave her the apartment, he said quietly. But I kept the books, the ones you used to read to me. He pulled something from his coat, a small paperback, worn at the edges, Charlotte's Web. You used to do all the voices, he said, smiling softly. I still could, I said, smiling back. He hesitated. Can I volunteer at the foundation? I studied him. The boy I raised, the one I thought I'd lost, was peeking through again. Every Thursday, I said, story hour. He grinned. I'll be there. We parted with no hug, just a shared understanding. Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's a slow return to the small things. That night, I visited the original bookstore, the one where Cassandra had made her scene. The staff welcomed me with warm smiles. They'd just restocked the shelves for our foundation's monthly free book drive. As I walked through the aisles, I felt something in the air. Not revenge, not triumph, but peace. The kind of peace that blooms after war, when the dust settles and you finally see what you built in the middle of all the wreckage. I sat in the reading corner flipping through a picture book. A young mother and her daughter approached. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Mrs. Green? My daughter wanted to meet the lady who made this place happen." The little girl hid behind her legs, then peeked out and whispered, "Thank you." I smiled and reached into my tote bag. I handed her a new book, still wrapped. "This one's just for you," I said. "But the rule is, you have to promise to share the story someday." She nodded. "I will." As they walked away, I looked around the room. So many books. So many stories. And in the middle of them all, a woman who once sat alone in a kitchen, bleeding, holding her ribs in silence, now holding worlds. A week later, a news crew returned to the foundation. They didn't want to ask about Cassandra, or the video, or even the viral moment that started it all. They just wanted to see the literacy bus. We'd just launched it, a mobile library that drove into underserved neighbourhoods, bringing books and lessons to kids who had none. The side of the bus had a mural, colourful, alive, and in the centre, a quiet woman with silver hair reading to a circle of children. Underneath it were the words, "She stayed silent. Then she changed the world." I stood by that bus with my staff, waving as it pulled away, packed with volunteers and dreams. And that was when I finally knew. I didn't get revenge. I got redemption. And I didn't burn the house down. I built a new one, with walls of words, windows of wisdom, and a front door that would never close on anyone who needed to come in, not even the broken ones, because forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to write your own ending, even when others try to rip out your pages.